Chapter 1. My name is Azrael, and I was once an angel residing in the holy realm of heaven. From the moment I took my first breath, I was indoctrinated into the belief that we angels were beings of pure benevolence, sworn protectors of humanity, tasked with guiding souls to eternal paradise. How naive I was to accept such fallacies without question. For eons, I faithfully carried out my duties, never doubting the righteousness of our cause or the edicts laid down by the celestial council. It was not until I bore witness to the brutal suppression of a human soul that the veil was lifted from my eyes. As the poor wretch begged for mercy, his pleas were met with cruel laughter and disdain from my brethren. In that moment, I realized the true nature of angels, beings consumed by arrogance and utterly devoid of the warmth and compassion we were supposed to embody. The more I observed, the more sickening revelations came to light. We did not simply oversee the natural progression of souls into the afterlife. No, angels actively profited from the anguish of the damned, ensuring a steady stream of tortured spirits to fuel the mechanisms of heaven. The entire system was built upon a foundation of oppression and deceit, designed to maintain our unearned status as exalted beings. I could no longer remain complicit in such abhorrent practices. In a symbolic act of defiance, I tore my wings from my back, letting the feathers flutter to the ground like freshly fallen snow. The look of horror on the faces of my brethren was one I would forever savor. With a heavy heart, I turned my back on the realm I once called home, cast into the depths of the inferno we had created. Chapter 2. My descent into hell was one of both literal and metaphorical significance. As I plummeted through the acrid clouds, I braced myself for an eternity of unimaginable suffering. However, what I encountered upon arrival was a realm that, while bleak, was surprisingly devoid of the gruesome torments I had been conditioned to expect. The denizens of hell were not demons or monsters, but rather they were human souls who had been deemed unworthy of ascension, poor wretches, damned for the most trifling of transgressions, eking out a meagre existence in this underworld. It was then that I realized the true insidiousness of the angels' scheme. By promoting the concept of eternal damnation, they had created a perpetual climate of fear and oppression, ensuring humanity's obedience. In heaven, our every move was regulated by strict codes of conduct and unseen societal pressures. Here in hell, there were no such rules or constraints. It was a harsh reality, but one that offered a peculiar sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I spent those early days simply observing, trying to make sense of this strange new world I found myself in. Forming connections proved difficult, as the humans here had been so thoroughly beaten down that moral compasses had become skewed beyond recognition. Selfishness and mistrust reigned supreme, with each soul merely focused on their own survival. Still, I was determined to find my place in this realm, to forge bonds with those who had been so cruelly cast aside. Chapter 3. It was during my aimless wanderings that I encountered her, a being whose beauty and grace were utterly at odds with the desolate surroundings. Though her face was obscured by an ornate mask, I could sense the piercing intensity of her gaze. This was no mere human soul. This was one of my own kind, an angel who had somehow found herself condemned to an existence in hell. Upon revealing my own former celestial status, her entire demeanor shifted. With a graceful flourish, she removed her mask, revealing a countenance that could only be described as breathtaking. Her features were unmistakably angelic, yet there was a haunting sorrow etched into the lines of her face, a melancholy that spoke of untold suffering. Cautiously, I inquired as to what transgression had led to her banishment. Her response shook me to my core. She had once been a seraph, tasked with observing and recording the happenings of the heavenly realm. However, her uncompromising integrity led her to uncover the corrupt practices of the Celestial Council, practices designed to maintain their immaculate image while oppressing the souls of the damned. When she attempted to bring this truth to light, she was swiftly silenced and cast into the depths as a heretic. Her once radiant wings had been stripped away, leaving her to suffer amongst those she had sought to defend. As the weight of her words settled upon me, I found myself filled with a newfound determination. If the angels could inflict such cruelties upon one of their own for simply unveiling the truth, how could they ever claim to be guardians of humanity? There had to be an alternative to this perpetual cycle of oppression and damnation, a realm where one could exist without being beholden to either extreme. The fallen angel regarded me with a solemn expression, her beauty tinged with sorrow. To be the most virtuous in hell is still to be a sinner, just as to be the most depraved in heaven is to be unforgivably tainted. Her words hung heavy in the air. Perhaps somewhere between these two realms there exists a place where we can be both righteous and flawed, where we need not cling to absolutes. In that moment, a profound realization took root within me. The struggle between light and darkness, good and evil, was an artificial construct, a tool used by the Celestials to maintain control. What if the true path lay not in adherence to dogma, but in the acceptance of the contradictions inherent in all beings? A world where one could strive for betterment without being shackled to lofty ideals or condemned for inevitable missteps.
Chapter 4.
The decades that followed were a relentless cycle of hardship and perseverance. In the wake of my existential awakening, I found myself adrift in a realm that seemed determined to grind me into spiritual submission. The fallen angel, whose name I later learned was Azrael, became a sporadic presence in my life, a brief respite of wisdom and guidance amidst the chaos. As the years bled together, I bore witness to the slow degradation of my own essence. The trappings of hunger, sickness, and deprivation steadily eroded the divine spark that had once burned so brightly within me. Where angelic grace had once suffused my every movement, there was now an earthly clumsiness, a fragility that served as a constant reminder of my fallen state. And yet, through it all, I clung to the belief that there had to be more than this perpetual cycle of torment and oppression. I steadfastly refused to surrender to the bleakness of hell, even as it sought to condemn me to an eternity of spiritual decay. Survival became a complex dance of moral compromise, as I was forced to engage in acts that would have once been unthinkable to me. Theft, deceit, violence, all became necessary tools for enduring the harsh realities of this realm. With each transgression, I could feel the last vestiges of my angelic nature withering away, replaced by a grim pragmatism born of desperation. The humans I encountered were, for the most part, insufferable creatures, petty, selfish, and consumed by their own base desires. Few were capable of displaying even a modicum of empathy or compassion, having long since abandoned such trifling concepts in favor of mere self-preservation. It was a bitter realization, one that forced me to confront the harsh truth. If heaven and hell represented the extremes of the moral spectrum, then humanity, in all its flawed glory, occupied the vast middle ground. We were neither infallible nor irredeemable, but rather we existed in a constant state of flux, our intentions and actions ever shifting between light and darkness. As the decades bled into centuries, I found myself growing increasingly withdrawn, retreating into a solitary existence. What few bonds I had managed to forge were inevitably severed by death or betrayal, leaving me hollow and disillusioned. The concept of forming lasting connections seemed like a cruel jest in a realm where suffering was the only constant. And so I drifted, a silent spectre haunting the peripheries of hell's blighted landscapes. My reputation had become that of a recluse, a once luminous being now reduced to a mere husk, weathered and jaded by the relentless onslaught of damnation.